Hello. Hopefully it's a hello if you can see me on. So we're just doing a little bit of technical troubleshooting this morning. And so not only the internet, but also StreamYard, the streaming platform that we use, has been a little glitchy recently. So hopefully we're on. Rosalade, it's cool to see you on, as always. Dolph, it's very cool to have you here. I was just talking about this book that you had recommended in the last stream. Definitely came into play with the last song. So we're going to be doing some song insight fun today, and also have a great question that Tim had asked on locals about scale degree, well, note names. And so we're going to geek out about that. Okay, cool. Dolph, you can see that you can see me or hear me. Awesome. So lots of good stuff. I hope you're getting into the, oh yeah, so I am blurry. Okay, cool. So that's good to know. It might just be that I haven't had my coffee yet. But I think it's the internet. I'm sorry for the bad connection. So we'll do some more troubleshooting after this. And oh, cool, Russell, you said that you got the book and it's on its way. Awesome. Yeah, so I am a bit distorted. And can you hear me clearly? Like, is the audio at least somewhat clean? Okay, yeah. So this is just like a throwback. Just pretend like we're in 1996 right now, and we've entered the time machine of blurriness, and we'll roll with it for now, and then work out the logistics on the back end after the stream. So what we're going to do is we are going to look at another song. Now, in lesson 19, let me see if I have that. Oh, and Dolph, I guess you won't see because the interface is so awesome, but this is the song we're going to look at. I should have known better by the Beatles. And I am using the Notability app, which I must say has definitely streamlined the whole setup here. So I really appreciate you recommending that app, because it has made a huge difference. I'm going to pull something up here if I can find it. In lesson 19, which is the latest post in the music theory course, we talk about, I'm pulling it up here, we talk about, or I talk about in the lesson, a couple of playlists that we'll be building over time. And one of them, I'm not finding the image, but one of them is a Beatles Insight, Songwriting Insight playlist, which I think is really good material for really wrapping our arms around the songwriting process, because the Beatles were masters of harmony, masters of songwriting, and great with the whole art of music. So that's something that we'll be working on, as well as another playlist mentioned in lesson 19, which is just the circle of fifths for songwriting. So we're not just, focusing on the Beatles only, because that, there's a whole lot of music in the world. So we're going to be playing with different songs as well. For today, we are going to be playing with a Beatles song. Like I say, it's I Should Have Known Better, which is from 1964. And we'll dive into some of what went into that song. And then after that, like I say, there is a great question that Tim had posted about note names, and then anything we want to chat about here. So all that said, let's jump into it. So this song is not on my screen. Hold on, sorry. I'm going to need to pull that up. And one time I was talking with a guy who had said, he mentioned, he's like, oh yeah, the Beatles, their songwriting was, and he's the kind of guy who like speaks as though he knows what he's talking about, whatever the subject is. In this particular instance, I did happen to know that he was full of shit. So it was interesting. He said, yeah, the Beatles, they used basically like really basic chords until like 1968 or something. Like they didn't know really what they were doing, and it was just like really basic stuff. And I'm like, that's not true. And we're gonna definitely unwrap that more as we go into these songs. This song is from 1964. I Should Have Known Better. And while it is relatively straightforward in that it's largely just some basic chords in the key of G, in this case, the key of G Ionian, which is just the major key, it has some really cool movement and an especially nice bridge section in the middle, which is awesome. Like it's a classic. Uh-oh. Virtuous Heretic, you're asking, am I frozen? Oh, I'm frozen. Can you hear my voice at least? Okay. Well, so maybe I wonder if I'm going to need to like restart, if it's just or what that does with the stream. That's not good. Okay, so maybe we should just try that. I'm sorry, guys, for this technical issue. This was not planned, obviously. No one ever plans technical issues. Yeah, so maybe should we try that and then see if the link still works? And then in that case, it might be okay. So I'm sorry. Let's just try it and see if that works. And I apologize for the issue here. So let's do it. Okay, hold on. I'm being told to stand by. Okay, let's see. All right. Oh, I see. I see. So maybe we're going to hold on to that and then reset it down there. Okay, we're just figuring it out. Okay, shall I? I'm going to go for it. I will be right back. I wish I had standby music, but I don't. So I'll be here shortly. I'll wait for that first. Yeah. Let's see if I can. Yeah. Am I on? Hey. Let me check to make sure that the audio is correct. Okay, thank you for your patience. And this song is going to be so great that it'll hopefully be worth the wait. So, okay, awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you, Virtuous Heretic, for the troubleshooting. Okay, so this song is from 1964, and it's actually one of my favorites. Despite how simple the progression is, it has a really good just mix of elements. So let's jump into it with some images. Okay, so this song is in the key of G Ionian. We'll look at the chord map to really dissect it, but also the chord diagrams here help with making sense of things. So what we have here is the key of G. So this one chord, the G, is a prominent chord throughout the song because we're establishing the tonic or the tonal home bass, in this case, a G major chord. And I mean, right out of the gate, John Lennon is like, you know what? Let me just make it clear that we have a 1, a 5. So we're building tension to that dominant chord, back to the 1, to the 5. Just like we did with All You Need Is Love. It's kind of like the fanfare of the do grand entrance tonic. Let's establish and really set it up. Who is the star of the show? In this case, it's G. By this back and forth between the 1, the 5, the 1, the 5, we're really establishing. Oh, and this should say a 1. I'll fix that before I post this PDF with the chord progressions. But so it's 1 5 1 5. So it's G D. So G D G D, and he's got this cool rhythm going on. It almost has like a, I don't know if you'd call that flamenco, but it's kind of like a cool. And then the cool thing that he does, well, maybe I should just kind of play it first so you know, if you don't know the song, you can hear what we're getting at. So I'm just going to play through it really quick. And I'm not going to do the lyrics because I can never remember them. So it's. Okay, so that's the gist of it. Man, that is a higher register. My vocal cords are questioning why I'm playing this song at this time in the morning. But anyway, here we go. So the progression is G. So it's 1 5 1 5. So it's just, I'm playing it as open chords, an open G to an open D, and I'm guessing he, was just playing. John Lennon was sitting there playing these chords, and he's like, well, what's a common note between these two chords is a D note. And so he just kind of was like, and that's how the song starts, is this D note, and then he kind of moves around with. So he's kind of moving around. So it's. So he goes to an E note, which he goes to the relative chord of E minor. So he comes, let's come to the progression and show what he did. So he bounces around between this 1 and the 5. The common note between those two chords is a D. Notice how G has a D note, this orange square, and D, the D major chord, of course, has a D note, this orange square. So he's holding that D note. So he's bouncing back and forth between an E and a D. So and then so he's just kind of doing a D, an E, and a B, which are all in the key of G. They're all in the G major scale. And then he comes to and then he goes to the relative minor. E minor, this minor 6, is the relative minor of G major, the major 1. So this E minor chord is, since John Lennon was establishing that this back and forth kind of flow between the 1 and the 5. So he goes to the 1, the 5, and then instead of going to the 1, he substitutes that 1 with a minor 6. The minor 6 sounds very similar to the 1, and so it works because it's close enough that your ear is expecting to hear that chord, but then it's a little bit different and adds some variety and adds some different direction to the melody to not just drone on that D. So you have that's that E minor chord, and then he comes back to that G. So that is and that should say, let me mark it because I didn't mark it with the proper numeral. That's a 4 chord instead of a 1 chord. And then it goes to the 5. So from 1 to 5, from 4 to 5, from C major, D, and then to that G. So notice how these two notes, the C, red, and D, orange, between C and D, they're kind of alluding to the chords that the chord that they have in common, or the relationship that they share. Red and orange share a chord in common, a friend of a friend, and the friend they share in common is that G. So from C to D, we're kind of saying, hey, we're kind of setting it up to anticipate. Our ears want to hear that G, which he plays, and then establishes that back and forth again. Man, I did not. Oh, you know what? I know what happened there. So these chords, I wonder if I can. These chords should not be there. So I'll clear that up with the PDF that I post. So we're basically just really establishing G as the tonic, and then we anticipate hearing G right there, but we substitute it with its relative minor chord, E minor, and then from C to D really just sets up the re-entrance of G and establishing G again as the tonic as we go back and forth. So that is the verse section. C, D, and then to that G, and then he goes back into that. I don't know if you call it flamenco, but it's kind of got this cool rhythm. Which was kind of a hip rhythm, especially in 1964 when the song came out. There was kind of that, cool vibe in rhythms in popular music. Now, the verse section is correct. You see this chord and you're like, that seems wrong. Well, it actually is meant to be there because this is when the song starts to take some different harmonic direction, and we're setting ourselves up into this bridge that's coming up. So we repeat the same kind of pattern of 1 5 1 5 1 5 1 5, repeating that back and forth, and then we go to this E minor chord, and then our ear is going to want to go from that 4 to that 5 like we did before, but it's going to go to this 3, and we're going to look at why that is in the chord map. But so it's the So it's from a C to a B7, a B major chord, which is not in the key. So let's look at the chord map actually. So we're kind of getting our bearings here. We're in the key of G. Right now, this is showing that it's in the key of B. So I'm going to rotate the chord map so that we are looking at the key of G, Ionian. Thank you so much. So G is the 1. It's Ionian. So we're playing chords that are sticking with this. So far, we've played a G, we've played a C, a D, and an E minor. So we're solidly within the bounds of the key of G. But then suddenly we just played a B chord over here. What is up with that? Well, as we're looking at the chord map and getting a feel for borrowed chords, this chord got borrowed outside the bounds. It's how did this get invited to the party when it's clearly not within the bounds of the key? Well, B is related to this E minor chord in that it's the dominant 5. E minor, its 5th is directly just clockwise, 1 notch to the right. But instead of playing a B minor chord, we're playing a B major chord. This actually shows up a lot in progressions going to a major 3. Why does a major 3 work? Well, it works for a couple of reasons, actually. G major's relative minor chord is E minor. It's the chord right above. So all of the major chords are in this inner ring, minor chords are in this middle ring, and then diminished chords are in the outer ring. And so this major chord is aligned with or directly below its relative minor, E minor in this case. So E minor's dominant 5, its 5, minor 5 chord is B minor, or its major 5 is over in the middle ring, but it's shifted over because of the layout of chords and how the different chords overlap and are interlaid together within music. Also, this B major chord works for another reason in this chord progression, which is really cool. So let's look at this diagram again. In the previous section, in verse 1, we went from this E minor chord to C major to D major and then to 1. So John Lennon set us up already to anticipate hearing this 5 right here, from a 6 to a 4 to a 5. So he does it again, kind of. He goes from a 6 to a 4 to a major 3, 7. How's that anything like a 5? Well, it actually is a couple of steps removed from a 5. So the 5, just like G's relative minor is E minor right there, the 5 chord, D major is the dominant 5 to the tonic 1, or G in this case. D's relative minor is B minor. And so it's related to D. So instead of going to E minor, so the 6, the 4, the 5, like we did in the first verse, now in the second verse, we're going the 6, the 4. Instead of the 5, we're saying, well, relative minor is close to D major. And then the B major is close to B minor. So that's just one step removed. So going from 6 to 4 to 5 is very similar to going 6, 4 to major 3 because of that connection. The relative minor and the dominant 5 of the 6 works. It's kind of like two ways of arriving at B major, or the significance, I should say, of B major is for a couple of reasons. One is the dominant 5 of the 6 chord, which is related to the 1, the tonic. And it's also just a note away. B minor and B major, there's just one note difference. And 5 is closely related to G. Therefore, 5's relative minor is closely related to G. And B minor is just one note different from B major, which is also closely related to G. G also has this geometric relationship with B major and E flat with this perfect triangle of major thirds. So there's like an underlying geometric framework that also informs that at a deeper level. But just in terms of harmonic relationships, this B major, in other words, is part of the club. Like it's invited to the party because it's a friend of multiple friends. It's B major is a friend of E minor. which is a friend of G, the tonic, and B major is a friend of or closely related to B minor, which is a friend of the tonic of G. So this is a step removed through this route, and it's directly related to the relative minor of the tonic in that case. It's a lot of words. Hopefully that makes sense in terms of why B major is played in this case, even though it seems like it's totally wrong. Like, why would you play B major? Well, it's a friend of the tonic. So I'm going to play this progression again, and then we'll move into the bridge, which personally is my favorite part of the song and why I think it's one of the Beatles' best tunes. So it's and then this part is awesome. I'll just play it first and then we'll analyze it. So let's look at that progression. So it's a minor chord. Now, the minor chord makes sense here, the E minor, because again, it's the relative minor of the tonic. So instead of going to that G, landing on that G and starting the verse section with a tonic chord, a major 1, we're going to the E minor chord, which sounds similar to G, because G, the G note is G, B, and D, and the E minor chord is E, B, and G. So it shares 2 of the same notes as a G major chord. So it's a minor 6 to a major 4 to a major 1 to a major 3. So this major 3, again being the dominant chord of minor 6, is a nice lead in to E minor. So it's like the dominant chord or the chord of tension to this minor chord. So from E minor to G, so he lands on that G again to reestablish G as the tonic, because the relative minor sounds so close to G that it could be like, you could kind of think of it as a nice substitute, such a good substitute that it could become like the tonic after a while. If we really just kind of stuck to that E minor, we eventually could kind of shift our ears into hearing it as a minor key, a song in a minor key. So it's almost like if you think of a substitute teacher at school. What if the substitute teacher was so good and just stuck around for so long, the students would start to think, oh, the substitute teacher is just my teacher. Like, this substitute is so at home here. I'm so used to seeing the substitute that if the original teacher came back from whatever reason they were away, like in this case, the tonic G major, if we stuck with E minor long enough, we would forget who the original teacher was or who the original, in this case, tonic or head of the class was. So he comes back to this G major chord to say, hey, remember, folks, that G is the tonic. And we're going to eventually return to the tonic once again. So it's a nice departure, but it's only a departure. We're not, setting up camp and making E minor the tonic here. So we're eventually going to make our way back to this G. And so we have to kind of midway just say, hey, G, we're still in the context of G. And so he does that again with this progression as well, because this 4-5-1 strongly establishes that 1 is the tonic, and then the minor chord fits in well. And then again, the 4-5-1 is kind of that trumpet heralding the king, saying, do, 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 do. Here comes the king. Who's the king? Because of the trumpet call, this 4 and this 5 really set up the tonic as the point of resolution. So let me erase, because there's an eraser in this app, which is awesome. Just gonna clean that up. Oh, this app, Dolph Notability, is truly wonderful. So I'm gonna play this progression, and we'll kind of hear what's going on. So. Back to that cool rhythm, and so again establishes the tonic is or G is the tonic, and then the song basically repeats. In verse 3, we go back into that back and forth. And then we go into the interlude, which the Beatles did this a lot. The interlude is basically a fancy word for solo. George Harrison steps to the front of the stage, plays a solo. What is he playing the solo over? Typically the verse section, but without lyrics. It's basically the chord progression of the verse. So it's the familiar patterns, familiar sequence, but it's just, the same progression that we've already established and anticipate hearing. And then, sorry, I lost count. Okay, and then the verse just continues on. But then again, that verse sets up the minor 6 to the 4 to the major 3, sets up the bridge, which sounds so good. So, can't you see? And then into that wonderful progression of. And then coming back ultimately to the G major chord. So I have some cleanup to do on this diagram, on these diagrams before I post it, but I'll post that today with the chord progression. And that is, I should have known better with kind of a false start with the technical troubleshooting, but such a great progression, and more to come on Beatles songs and other songs. I was actually looking at some songs yesterday, some really good ones that are excellent examples of not only chords within a given key, but where modal mixture comes in, where we start to play and pull chords from different areas of the chord map. So right here in this example, B was the one anomaly in the progression where we pulled, in fact, I'll just use the chord map. I have a diagram in the PDF too that shows this, but we're sticking mostly to the 1, 4, 5, and 6. You really can't go wrong with those chords. And then pulling in this major 3, which is the one chord outside of the official chords of the key. And some of the other songs that we're going to be looking at really start to pull chords from various parts of the chord map using modal mixture and chord substitution, secondary dominance, and all of that good stuff. Now, I have ideas for songs, and I'm going to be, going through various songs. But if you have any recommendations, suggestions, requests, let me know. And if it's something that I dig into, that could be great. All right. There also is the question that Tim had asked about note names. So I want to just cover that quickly here, and then also if there's any questions that we want to speak to live. So let me pull up a PDF and read Tim's question, because it's a good one. And it's from lesson 2. It's a diagram in lesson 2. So let me just pull that up here. So this is the diagram that Tim is referencing. So Tim said, I was wondering why, when we start using the keys from the left side of the circle of fifths, from G flat to F, we switch to flat notation. Is this a standard thing? It's really getting in the way of me absorbing the note makeup of keys. So let's just use the chord map as our example because it has this going on. Let's make C the tonic. And I know the chord map is kind of a different depiction of the circle of fifths, but the idea is there. So here in the circle of fifths, we have progressive sharps. Like you can see here, there's a 1 sharp in the key of G. There's 2 sharps in the key of D. Here, let's move into the key of D. We have 2 sharps, C sharp and F sharp. In the key of A, where A is the tonic, the 1, so we're in A Ionian or A major, we have 3 sharps. We have F sharp, C sharp, and G sharp. In the key of E, we have another sharp. It's F sharp, C sharp, G sharp, and D sharp now, and so on. So it's progressive sharps as we cycle through on the right side, going clockwise. In the other direction, so we're going to go back to C as our starting point. We have going to the left 1 notch. In the key of F, we have 1 flat. It's B flat. If we go further clockwise by 30 degrees or 1 notch to the next key, we have B flat and E flat. Those are the two notes, really, and chords that have a flat in them. Then we go to the key of E flat, further to the left. So sorry, I'm rotating the map, but we're still, like if C was at the top or in the 12 o'clock position, if this was a clock going counterclockwise, E flat has B flat, E flat, and A flat. Those are the flats. And progressively further this way. Now there is some overlap between, like if we come to G flat, I'm going to have it at the bottom here, but just because it's kind of, well, maybe I'll keep it at the bottom. It's upside down. We have G flat and F sharp. So those are 2 enharmonic or synonymous names for the same note, or in this case, the same chord, F sharp and G flat. We also have D flat and also C sharp. We have B, also known as C flat. We have G sharp minor, also known as A flat minor, and so on. So why not, though, just, and I'm paraphrasing what Tim had asked, and so Tim, if I'm misstating what you're saying, forgive me, but I think I'm catching the gist of it, is why not it just progress using sharps? So just more and more sharps. If that cycle is what happens, 1 sharp, then 2 sharps, 3 sharps, why not just continue on so we have more and more sharps? Calling this a G flat instead of an F sharp is kind of confusing, especially on the guitar. So on the guitar, especially for guitar players, sharp and flat can be especially confusing because the guitar world is sharp centric in that you have, I have the low E string. Okay, let me get in screen here. So we have E, F, F sharp, G, G sharp, A sharp, B, and C, and so on. So as you're rising up a fret, it's 1 sharp higher. It's 1/2 step higher. So F sharp, G, G sharp. So why would we call it F, G flat, and then G, A flat, and A? Doesn't flat mean going lower? And so flat and sharp can be confusing, especially for guitar players when it comes to frets. But there are really good reasons to use flats, especially on the left side of the circle of fifths. So let's get into that. Now, there are some posts in, and so Tim and I had some back and forth in the chat on that for posts that speak to this. So definitely check out those posts in the library under the theory playlist under notes. Gets into the naming conventions, but this is going to speak to why would we use G flat here instead of F sharp and so on, especially because we have, like in this case, a C flat, and C flat is a less common name for the B note, but it makes sense in the key of G flat to call it C flat. And so there's a post there that talks about the naming conventions. These are all the enharmonic names or synonymous name options for the notes. And let me get at. Okay, so there are a couple of rules for the naming of notes in keys, and this is the gist of it. 2 basic rules. One is the notes are listed in alphabetical order. and also you don't repeat a letter name. So let's look at that as an example. So in the key of C, for example, we have C, C, and then the next note, whole step, is to a D. So we wouldn't call it C and then C double sharp because we already use C in that case. So now it's going to be alphabetically, makes sense to call this a D. So D comes after C, and then a whole step to E. So we're going to call it E, not F flat, because we would have skipped E, and that doesn't make sense. We've got to have C, D, E alphabetically, and then F is the next letter, and then G. We wouldn't call it F sharp because, or F double sharp here, because we already used F right here. We wouldn't call it A double flat because we would have skipped G. So G is the next one naturally, and then A, and then B, and then C. So for the key of C, it's C, D, E, F. So C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. So, and that's relatively easy, especially because there are no sharps or flats in the key of C. However, as we get into some of the other keys where we have other starting points, other letter names, it can get potentially a little confusing. Let's look at the key of G flat, okay? So ultimately what we want to do is we want to streamline all of these flats. Accidentals are just a broad term for sharps and flats, or double sharps and double flats. They're called accidentals because the key of C has no sharps or flats. It's as if C is like the perfect key. It comes from traditional notation and conventions of standard notation, but C not having any sharps or flats is like pure. And so anything that deviates from that is considered an accident. And that's why we call sharps and flats accidentals. You can think of that way. So let's look at G flat. Now G flat is another way of referring to F sharp. Notice how, looking at these dots here, we have F sharp, G sharp, A sharp, B, C sharp, D sharp, E sharp, and F sharp. That's a whole, whole, half, whole, half. That's the whole steps and half step interval pattern of the major scale. F sharp is just another name for the G flat major scale. Notice it's the same pattern of whole, half, whole, half. So G flat and F sharp are the same thing. They're synonymous. They're just different ways of referring to the same scale. So why not just call it F sharp instead of G flat? So let's look at that. Let's dive in a little bit and see why it makes sense. So we have here, let's go through and just label them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And let's write, well, we'll just write like this. So we have another name for that is F sharp, G sharp, A sharp, B, C sharp, D sharp, E sharp, F sharp. So stacked on top of each other are two different versions, two different ways of referring to the same scale. Same notes, G flat and F sharp are one and the same. We have, those are the same, A flat and G sharp are the same, B flat and A sharp are the same, and so on. So what makes one better than the other? Well, let's look at so Tim also asked the question, well, I mean, if you add in, like, say a flat 5, for example, you're not avoiding accidentals. So in this case, let's say that we have a D flat, a D double flat is the flat 5, and an E double flat is the flat 6, and an F flat is the flat 7, a B double flat is the flat 3, and an A double flat is the flat 2. Okay, so when we're looking at flats, we sure have a lot of accidentals, a lot of double flats in this case. Well, when we get into the sharp version, we have a flat 2 of G sharp is just G. It's simpler, not as many accidentals there already. We have the flat 3 in this case is just A. Then we have a flat 5 is just C, a flat 5 is D, and a flat 5 a flat 7, I should say, is E. So already it appears as though we have way fewer accidentals if it's F sharp. So I'm going to use another color. So we're getting a lot of colors here, but let's say just comparing just the main scale degrees of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. If we just compare the main notes, we have G flat, A flat, B flat, C, where there's at least one note in the major scale that has no accidental F in the flat version. In the sharp version, F sharp major scale, we have F sharp, G sharp, A sharp, B. Hey, there's one without an accidental. And then C sharp, D sharp, E sharp, and F sharp. So they're kind of equal in terms of main scale degrees, F and B. Those are the two notes that don't have an accidental. So they're on par as far as like which one is better in terms of streamlining the mouthful of labels to use. When we get into the other non-diatonic notes, or the flat 2, the flat 3, flat 5, flat 6, and flat 7, well, F sharp is definitely the winner, because there are, we have G, A, C, D, and E, which are all just natural notes. There's no accidental. So in that case, you could technically say that F sharp is the better labeling to use in terms of streamlined, just less taxing on the tongue, right? There's fewer accidental sharps and just little caveats and labels to use. Let's look though at the next. So we got to, in our example here, we were looking at in the key of F sharp or G flat. So I'm going to go down to F sharp or G flat. We have F sharp does seem to be the winner in terms of simplicity of labeling. Let's go though one notch clockwise to now the key of D flat or C sharp. Well, if F sharp was better, maybe C sharp will be better in this case. Though as the labels show, D flat is bigger. So we're kind of saying, maybe D flat is the winner. But let's look, winner meaning just a simpler way to refer to the patterns. So let's go back to our labels, and we're going to do the same thing, but now with the key of D flat versus C sharp. So D flat is scale degrees, main scale degrees of the major scale are D flat, E flat, or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. Let's label the enharmonic alternatives, or the key of C sharp is the same as D flat. Then we have C sharp, D sharp, E sharp, and then F sharp, G sharp, A sharp, B sharp, and C sharp. So let's look at, I'm going to circle the notes that don't have an accidental to see which one, if already with the major scale we have one that is a little more streamlined, a little easier on the eyes and mouth. So we have D flat, E flat, F. There's one that doesn't have an accidental. G flat, A flat, B flat, C flat. Hey, there's two right there. That's awesome. Let's look at now so that was this one has two notes that don't have accidentals. Now let's look at this one, which is, I use the same coloring just for consistency. It was, orange on top. You know what? Just to be clear or consistent. So D flat has two that are clean. And now let's look at C sharp. You have C sharp, D sharp, E sharp, F sharp, G sharp, A sharp, B sharp, and C sharp. Oh, my mouth is already tired saying all the sharp. So already D flat is is simpler. Now let's look at the flat 2, flat 3, 4, flat 5, flat 6, and flat 7. So E double flat, oh man, now we're starting to get some double flats. E double flat, F flat is the flat 3 in the key of D flat. We have A double flat, that's messy. Then B double flat, and a C flat is the flat 7. Okay, so we're definitely getting more accidentals when it comes to the non-diatonic notes, or the notes that aren't part of the major scale. In the key of C sharp, if we have a flat 2, we have D, and then E is a flat 3. Flat 5 is just a plain old G. Flat 6 is a plain old A. Flat 7 is a B. So when it comes to the scale degrees that aren't part of the major scale, the sharp version definitely wins out. It's definitely cleaner. But when it comes to the major scale, the main scale degrees, the flat version is definitely the winner. And since the major scale is the measure of all things, just as men is the measure of all things when it comes to philosophy, or at least as someone once said, the major scale is so important that actually just having a streamlined major scale does make the flat version, or in this case D flat, the winner as far as that goes. Now, if we can continue to cycle on in the circle of fifths progressively further into the territory of what would be extra sharps or into the flats, the flat version is more streamlined as far as the major scale degrees go, which is definitely of prime importance. But also, there's another reason for having flats, and why flats are advantageous. And again, I know this is anathema to a guitar player's mind because sharps are so prominent. I mean, if you go to like Ultimate Guitar or a lot of these websites, they show they cling to the sharp names of notes and keys so much that, I mean, you seriously can get into like D sharp, the key of D sharp. I'm looking at my chord map here. And it is, you start getting some pretty funky names. Actually, Ultimate Guitar is a good example of just bad naming in general. Tim didn't mention Ultimate Guitar, but I'm just using them as a common reference, or have been a common reference, where you start getting some pretty wacky names just because sharp is the emphasis for the naming convention. However, as we get into further into music theory, remember that all of these terms, all of these labels, sharps, flats, accidentals, they're like training wheels on our bike of knowledge. So as we're pedaling on this bike, the letter names and frankly the numbers and numerals are like training wheels. They help keep our balance, help us keep our bearings and get up and running, or up and rolling, to use the bike metaphor. However, ultimately, what matters is the underlying relationships that those symbols are trying to illustrate. So if we come back to this version of the circle of fifths, these enharmonic names, we have a bunch of different terms. We have, double flats, natural names, so D double flat, C natural, B sharp, we have D flat and C sharp. We have all of these different symbols, but what really matters is, and it's almost like looking at a magic poster or the magic eye posters, where it's like there's a pattern, there's an image there that's staring us in the face, but our eyes, if you've ever done a magic poster or magic eye poster, you have to kind of like train your eyes to actually see the image, because if you're focused on the wrong thing or focused on something that seems as though that's what you want to look at, the actual image of a magic eye is out of sight because of just a matter of focus. And so what really matters is these underlying geometric relationships between the notes. You have, squares of minor thirds. Sorry, I'm getting scribbly here. We have squares of minor thirds. We have triangles of, whoops, I meant to change the color there. We have triangles of major thirds. We have a hexagon of whole steps or whole tones. So we have these different actual patterns that are going on between the different notes in music, and the labels, the note names can really trip us up if they become the focus. So if you think of it as like a magic eye poster, like, or to mix metaphors, like the bicycle with the training wheels, the letter names, the scale degrees, the numbers, the numerals, all of these things help us to describe what we're seeing, but not necessarily understand what we're seeing. The actual patterns, the colors and shapes help us see what is really going on. And ultimately, like, to use the bike metaphor, if you can let go of the training wheels, once you kind of get balanced, then the training wheels at some point become not an asset, but a liability. They end up being the thing that can trip you up even more, because you can only go so fast with training wheels. Like, no one ever shows up to the Tour de France with their training wheels still on. And I know that's a big leap from just, getting your bearings, but it kind of makes metaphors with the magic eye. If you start to focus more on the patterns, the names don't matter as much. And especially, I know that your comment, Tim, is on lesson 2. So, and not wanting to get hung up on that, but as you go, like in lesson 3, we start getting into the relationships and how the colored shapes show what the letters and numbers are trying to show, but they kill 2 birds with 1 stone. They actually illustrate the note names and the interval relationships even more economically and more efficiently, streamlining that mental thought. And then lesson 4 gets into this geometric patterns that I'm alluding to with just a few lines here, but lesson 4 really builds on that. As we get into lesson or part 5, we get into modes, and modes are even more of a reason to use the flats. Hey, Dolph, I saw your comment here. So from the standpoint of non-repeating notes, the flats and or double sharps make sense. Same for sharps and double sharps. Yes. So when it comes to, you don't want to repeat the letter name. So following those 2 rules of in a given key, you have the notes in alphabetical order, so you're not skipping any notes, and you're also not repeating any notes. And so that's where the flats, the double sharps, that comes into play. When it comes into, or when we get into modes, flats are actually where it's at when it comes to. So I know we're at the hour. I because we had a late start, I'm just going to go a few more minutes here to maybe cover some of these points here that missed, that I haven't covered. But like with and I know, like in the case of Tim, your question, lesson 2, I understand. We're talking part 5. This is from lesson 18, so this is like 14 lessons ahead. So I don't expect. I'm not trying to like cram 14 lessons of information into this, but from a high level, you have modes, which are basically just, and as you can see, they're just permutations of the same underlying pattern. So the major scale in this example, we have like the numbers we were doing: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then 8 is the tonic. You can play the major scale. So that's the Ionian mode. Ionian is just an ancient Greek fancy name for the major scale. Dorian is just a permutation of that pattern, where we start on the 2nd scale degree, in this case D, and then end on the 2nd scale degree. We have the same pattern of whole steps and half steps, so whole half, whole, half, whole. Dorian has a different pattern of whole steps and half steps, but you can see it's the same underlying sequence of notes. So that's Dorian, Phrygian, and so on. So we have these relative modes that are related. They're relative because they stem from the same source scale. They're just permutations of the same pattern. In this example, C major. And because of that sequence, if we just treat each respective note as the tonic, in this case, C is 1, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 in Ionian. Dorian, if we make D 1, then we have 1, 2, flat 3, 4, 5, 6, flat 7, 1. If Phrygian, if E in this case is the tonic, we have 1, flat 2, flat 3, 4, 5, flat 6, flat 7, 1, and so on. You can see that as you go down the line, you have an increasing number of flat scale degrees. Flat intervals are what modes are about. And again, this is from lesson 18, so it's beyond lesson 2. But just looking ahead, knowing, if not resting assured, at least trusting that flats will be significant, is when we get into modes, flats are really important. And then parallel modes. So relative modes are just permutations of the same underlying pattern. So it's this pattern of scale degrees. Parallel modes are like the mirror image of those, where it's the same pattern of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 in Ionian, or 1, 2, flat 3, 4, 5, 6, flat 7, 8 in Dorian, and just for one more, 1, flat 2, flat 3, 4, 5, flat 6, flat 7, 8 in Phrygian, and so on. That again, flats are paramount when it comes to modes. And so, and in the circle of fifths, we have, and I know this is well beyond, and again, I'm not trying to like have this make complete sense, but at least just kind of an overview that parallel modes, you can see with the labels here in the chord map, that the parallel modes of C, for example, are off to the left. They're counterclockwise from a given one. So the major modes are in this range, and then to delve or dive into the minor modes and the diminished mode, we're going counterclockwise into flats. And that has to do basically with just the underlying structure of how the keys are related, where modes come from, and where modes are from where they are derived. And it has to do with flats. So I know it can seem counterintuitive to be speaking in terms of flats, especially for guitar if you've kind of been primed for thinking in terms of sharps, but flats are really important. I know that was super high level, and again, not meant to completely explain what that's about, but at least you can kind of see that there are patterns. There's an underlying structure to these patterns, and modes are, it's built on a framework of flats. And so flats are where it's at. So a couple of reasons to streamline the labeling process. Flats are generally more efficient, at least in terms of major scales. Like I say, in the key of F sharp / G flat, it's a toss up. You could say, well, F sharp is more efficient, but as you start to go further and further into the clockwise direction, you might as well start talking flats, because like I say, parallel modes, and I'm talking about C in this example, but anywhere you go, that same underlying structure, because music is cyclical and symmetrical, you still have parallel modes. In the key of D, parallel modes are still counterclockwise. Let's go over to the key of B. I'm going to rotate, so B is the tonic. Parallel modes are still counterclockwise. So it's the way that the underlying relationships are structured that informs that flatness, for lack of any better term than that. That's why that works that way. Continue on, keep going. Don't let the sharp flat hold you up, because you could refer to the terms either way, but ultimately they are like training wheels in that we just want to, I also am kind of picturing from Forrest Gump, if you've ever seen that movie, where it's the run, Forrest, run. He's got the braces on his legs, and, he starts running and he's outrunning those bullies, and he just it's like the slow motion actually gives me chills because it's such a cool scene where he's running and the braces just fall off and he just starts running, and that's how he ultimately becomes like a runner in life. If you've ever seen the movie Forrest Gump, if you haven't, set aside 4 hours. It's a really long movie. But it's those braces or those training wheels are helpful in the beginning, but ultimately they'll slow you down, and you want to not have that be your limiter, your pace car. Yeah. So you guys are the best. This live stream is except for the technical issues with the diagrams, the Notability app. I didn't use it, but this was brought to you by Dolph. Thank you, Dolph, for all your excellent recommendations. And this, even just being able to like show scale degrees and the different colors with this app is because this app is so awesome. So thank you for that. All right, I'm gonna clean up that PDF, add it to the library. Hey, thank you, Dolph, for the nerdy stuff, and thank you for geeking out with us, Rossalate. As always, hope you enjoy your weekend, and I will see you real soon. Take care.